we're going to start a new session. So for this shoot, before we get started, I'm going to start and go up to File within Capture One, New Session. And we'll call this CL Test. And then again, like I said, I like to have an underscore within my file naming. All the folders are already set up because this is a template that I've saved. Quickly, once you set up, Capture One has a lot of different toolbar settings. It'll actually, if you go here, Customize Toolbar, these are also all the possible tools. A lot of them are displayed default within these white bars. Those are all the spaces these tools can go. I've set my toolbar up to the specific tools I like. Once you do that, you need to go to Window, Workspace, and then Save Workspace. So you can see there's all these different workspaces. DB1 is the one I use. That's the one I've saved. So then it always looks the same when I open Capture One. If you don't do that, it'll go back to a default or another workspace, and it can be a little annoying. I like to keep the workspace the same every time. So that's how you save that. So back to tethering. Now that we're plugged in, I'm going to go to the Capture tab here on the toolbar. We're going to open that, and you'll see this area where it says Camera is blank. As soon as I turn my camera on, it'll start to display. You can see there's coming in, there's all my camera settings. So I'm on manual, I'm at a 200th of a second, ISO 100, f5.6. You can adjust your color temperature, it's in K for Kelvin, so I'm at 55, 60 or something like that. And you can even take a picture live from your computer screen if you to have your camera mounted on a tripod or something. You can actually remotely trigger your camera from Capture One. You can change everything, all your settings within here. Your shutter speed, I can adjust that up, down, wherever I want. You can adjust all that within Capture One. I try and do that within the camera, but just knowing you can do that, if you were photographing something remotely, you can have full control over your camera from your computer. So with that said, let's bring in our model, Michelle. And we're going to do a simple 2-light setup here, and we're going to shoot with Capture One. So I'm going to move the computer out of the way a little bit here. All right. How's it going?
Fantastic.
All right, perfect. So we have white seamless here, pretty basic backdrop. I actually want to make it darker to start. So I always work with white seamless because it can be gray. If you get far enough away from it with your lighting setup, it can almost be black. So it's very versatile. I'm going to have you come up to about right here. And like I said, we're just going to do a 2-light setup with a lot of shadow. So I'm using a beauty dish with a grid, and that's going to be our main light. We're going to set that up here. I'm just going to make a couple of adjustments. We're going to keep it pretty close to her because I want the light to fall off quickly so this background goes dark. Make a couple of adjustments. And we're going to place it off to the side because I don't want I want that shadow and I don't want a lot of light hitting the background. Turn that on. We'll do a quick meter. I want to shoot at about f5.6 or so. And then this will be our fill light. This is just that ProPhoto umbrella with no baffle at all. It's silver. It's probably about 40 some inches diameter. And that'll be our fill light just to give a little bit extra. And I'm going to keep the fill light fairly close to the camera again because the farther that light is from my subject, the more light's going to hit the background. So we want to keep the background pretty dark. When I'm doing this, just a quick lighting lesson, I like to do 1 light at a time when I'm doing my metering and when I'm doing my testing. And that's another good thing about shooting tethered. You can see what each light's doing as we go. So again, I want to shoot about f5.6. So we have our light on, we're going to meter, and we're at 200th of a second, ISO 100, and we want f5.6. So I'm just going to meter real quick. You don't have to do anything. We're at 6.3, which means we need to go down, 1/3 of a stop. And we're at 5.6. So we're square on for our main light. Now that we're tethered, I'm going to reconnect my trigger to my camera. The fill light is totally off, so we're going to get one image that's going to appear pretty dark. I'm going to have you turn just a little bit this way. And now with your head, I'm going to have you look almost back towards the doorway. Yep, right in there. We're going to take one test shot. I'm going to shoot just from about the waist up or a little below, just so we get our hands. And again, we have this white background. And I'm going to leave a little bit of space. I'm not too concerned about the background at this point. So this brings in our base image. You can see very pretty light, but it's very dramatic as far as the background goes. And now once we go into our tools, we can start adjusting some of the shadow, some of the highlights, things like that. But this is mostly just so I can see the light. So I like the light position. The focus is good and all that. Now what I'm going to do is introduce our fill light. So we're going to start with it pretty low. I like to start with fill just barely filling in the shadows, and then we'll slowly turn it up as we go. So that's another thing. With tethering, I can glance over and see how it's affecting the shot. So again, you can stay in the exact same position. I'm going to keep shooting a few different frames with different powers of fill. Oh, and what do you know? We came disconnected. So I meant to teach that, and it happened anyways. There's our image on the back of the camera where it came disconnected. So you can see that's why we have the card in. Now the only thing you need to do to reconnect is go back to capture. It actually automatically reconnected this time. But if that happens, just turn your camera off for about 1 second, turn it back on, and within 5 seconds you'll be reconnected. So it happens. Again, I've used this camera for about the last 3.5 years, and I've tethered probably hundreds of photo shoots with it. So my tether port is just a little wonky right now, and it easily comes disconnected, but we should be good from now on. So another test shot there. 1, 2, 3. There we go. So now you can see what the image looks like. That's just a little too much fill for me, so we're going to go ahead and turn it down about 1.5 stops. Take another test shot, and then we'll start our adjustments with tethering. Okay, so I'm good with that. Michelle, you can relax for a second. So what we're going to do now is come in and make our adjustments. So I'm going back to this local adjustments tab. This is where we're going to find all of the settings. Again, we'll go back and start from square one. We can reset that image, go to exposure. I'm going to turn up the exposure just a tad. And again, if you ever want to see where you're at, you can just take the eyedropper, and we know highlights are on her forehead. So if you look here, 223, that's the brightest point, so 223. So we're not even close to 255. Nothing's close to being blown out. We know that because the image is dark. But you can just take the dropper and go over any point of the image, and it'll tell you where you're at as far as highlights. So we're going to add a little bit of contrast. Now we're going to go into our highlights and shadows, bring down the highlights. I always do that. And then up the shadows just a little bit. I do like the general mood of this image. And now where it's going to get fun is we're going to go into color balance. So before I do that, I'm going to go into skin tones. We're going to select her skin tones. I'm just going to go from not the brightest point of her forehead, but just a little bit off. Expand that slightly. Her shirt's a similar color, so we got to make sure not to affect that too much. And we're going to adjust the hue and the saturation of the skin tone. So you can see as we desaturate, it changes the look of the image, but I'm pretty happy with that. And now we can go back to color balance, and that's where we can start adjusting. So you can go through the general setup there and see the presets that they offer, whether they're, things you like or things you don't like, or just a starting point. So let's say I'll just pick one and we'll kind of go with that. So let's say we like this cold orange, but it's a little bit orange for me. You can see if you look at all the sliders, it added quite a bit of blue to the shadows. We'll turn that down just a little bit. It added a little bit of red to the midtones, not much, even worth dealing with. And then it added a decent amount of orange to the highlights. We're going to turn that down. In fact, I'll turn it down all the way so you can see. Go back somewhere in between. And I kind of like, it's a little bit of like a cinematic color grading feel, but I enjoy that for what we're going to do. So now we'll go ahead, we'll look at our levels. We can up just a little bit of contrast there by adjusting the levels, or bring in the highlights a little brighter and then add a little contrast. And I'm not really going to adjust anything else. Just so you guys can see, if you went to styles, there's these built-in styles like color effects, how they affect, they're basically like more presets. And you could see you could apply something like this to all your images. Whatever one you select is up to you. There's different black and white settings that you can see live as you go. And it'll apply this setting to every image that comes in. Legacy styles, these are, just different looks, different feels depending on what you like. But one thing I will say, and skin effects, so there's different ways it's affecting skin tones. But one thing I will say is, and then built-in presets, sorry. So those are both the same. There's user styles here where it has, these are the ones you can purchase. So this is films light with grain. So you can go in here, look at all these films, whether it's Fuji or Kodachrome, anything like that, and these will add the grain. Again, I don't do this within Capture One. I like to do it elsewhere after I start editing, so I leave that alone. But I do like to see the options, and same with film grain and things like that. So we're going to go ahead and take our styles editor and start that over along with our film grain. And we're going to start with this basic image here with this toning. So now you'll see we have all of our settings. Now we can go ahead and we can just photograph the model. And as we go, those settings will apply to all the images. And if you want to go back and apply that to other images later, you can copy those settings and apply them. So Michelle, I'm going to have you start just kind of straight on to me. Wait just on one foot or the other, doesn't really matter. And then I kind of just want hands across like this. And I want your head off this way, almost like you're looking towards the computer there. Yep. And we can do some shots that are a little more zoomed in. And it doesn't matter if you zoom in or out, it still finds those skin tones and it applies everything how you want. I'm going to have you go ahead and turn completely this way. And now look back over that shoulder again and almost down towards the ground a little bit. Yeah, maybe eyes up towards the door just a little bit. And we'll zoom out so you can see how it doesn't matter which way you shoot. And as we continue to shoot, you'll see on the computer that it's constantly applying all those settings that we used from the very first one. And you know that because, again, this little icon in the bottom right of the thumbnails shows that it's applying those settings. So it's pretty easy to do. It's a great way to get, if we went to see this image, if you want to see what it looks like just totally raw, you can come up here and click the reset button. And again, it's just a little bit darker. You can always go to edit, undo, and it'll bring everything back that we did. So that's applying, all the highlights, the shadow control, everything. And if you change it from let's say we shot all these images and I just changed it to this image, it's going to apply these new settings to every image going forward. So it won't affect the images you already shot unless you want it to, but it will affect all the images going forward. So we'll leave that there. I'm going to have you stand straight on again. Take a tiny step back. And then again, I'm just going to continue with you looking that way just because where the light is. So we'll just do another farther away vertical. I'm actually going to step back and then zoom in myself. So I'm using the 24 to 70, and I want to get all that background behind her from a lower angle. I'm going to have you turn this way again, looking over that shoulder. And now look almost like towards the light. Yep, right there. OK, so just so you can see, oh, we came disconnected. So the images are right here on the back of my camera. So we'll actually reconnect. I'm going to turn my camera off. If you look at the icon here on Capture One on my screen, you'll see this little camera up here. As soon as I turn on and it reconnects, it'll light up that icon. There it is. We're reconnected, so we're good. So we'll shoot the same shot one more time here. Look down just a little lower. And now I'm going to do something just really wide that has more of the background and much more close up. So you can see, again, those images are reconnected and going into the camera. And it's applying all those settings from this shot to all the future shots. So that's how I would tether on the fly for a darker image. Now I want to switch lenses and change up this lighting just a little bit just to show you how we can adjust things a little bit further within Capture One by keeping the same outfit, general lighting feel, but I actually want to change up the color and mood so we can do that on the fly. So I'm going to make 2 adjustments and then switch lenses. So what I'm thinking here is I'm going to move the lights a little bit further away from Michelle here so that way we get a little less fall off. A little more even light from head to toe. We're still not going to include her feet, but I want to use a longer lens and get further away. So we're actually going to raise, I know I'm going to have to power up because we're going to move it further away. I'm going to raise the light up just a little bit and move it this way. So we're actually going to create even more shadow. And again, I always like to, the more you move your light away from your subject, you have to raise it up to maintain the same angle. So we're good there. We're going to meter because I still want it to be f5.6. And since we moved the light away, we're definitely going to have to turn it up. I already did a little bit, but maybe not enough. One of the things I like about the Pro Photos is that you can adjust the power from the trigger. So I don't have to lower the light to adjust the power. I can meter. Again, we know we want 5.6. We're at 4.5, so we need to go up. Should be about good here. 5.6. So we had to go up 2/3 of a stop. I could do that right from the trigger by going up 0.6. And we're good there. So I'm going to switch to the 70 to 200. So we're turning off the camera, which means it's going to become untethered momentarily. And now we're going to get another test shot without our fill. So again, this is going to be dark and moody. We're going to reconnect. I can look for that little icon to pop up back on Capture One. There we are. We're connected. And I'm going to have you take a tiny step back. And again, I'm going to have you turn this way slightly and looking over that shoulder back towards the door. Yep, right in there. And these are going to be pretty well zoomed in. I'm just going for a different compression, a different look using the 7200. So there we go. One test shot. Oh, you know what? I didn't put the trigger back on my camera, so the lights wouldn't have fired. Do that more than I would care to admit. There we go. All right, so we should have, you can see the light didn't fire on that first one. Capture One let us know that because it's a totally black frame. So there we go. Now we need our fill light. Turn that back on. We're going to leave that the same. We didn't change the placement or anything like that. We're still shooting at the same aperture. So now it should start to look a little similar, and then we'll make our adjustments. So I'm going to take 2 frames, one horizontal and one vertical with the 7200. And now what we're going to do going forward is I want to make adjustments for what I want this new set to look like. So we're going to go and change the color up a little bit. So we'll go back up the shadows a slight bit. Get rid of that tab. Get rid of that tab. Going to go to our color balance. Again, you'll see if you go down to your color editor and skin tone, it's still applying those adjustments to the skin, which I appreciate. Now we can choose a different selection as far as what we want the color to look like here. So for this one, we'll go with this adding even more blue. Play with what's going to happen to the midtones. We're going to keep that pretty minimal. And then our highlights. One thing I do want to do is adjust the brightness. So we're going to get those highlights up a little bit. Play the midtones down. And we're going to adjust the shadows to add this little hazy feel to it. And then what I'm going to do is go back to exposure and adjust the overall contrast. And just for fun, I'm going to add a little clarity to it. And we should be good right there. So now again, similar to before, I'm just going to keep shooting from some different angles, some different looks as far as how she's posing. We're going to keep the same overall feel because this is more about the tethering portion than posing. So I'm actually going to have you stay right like that. Turn your body this way about a quarter turn. Yeah, and then you can be looking right at me. We're not going to get a lot of catch lights here. It's going to be dark and moody. And I'm going to be shooting vertical with this 7200. So we're still tethered. We can see everything coming in here. Love the toning. It's just something different than what we did before. And you can see all those settings I just applied to the previous frame are now carrying forward to this frame. So yep, you can stay just like that. Yep, basically I'm just going to have you keep moving. That's perfect. I'm going to have you turn completely this way so we get even more shadow. And look almost towards the monitor here. So her face is going to fall off into shadow almost completely. And now looking back towards camera. Yep, now looking over your head again towards the door. And down, just something a little more moody. Chin down, eyes to camera. Great. And you can see as I'm shooting Capture One's having no trouble keeping up. Even though these are pretty big files, we're going to switch to some horizontals. Okay, one last set change. I'm going to have you look away one more time. There we go. One last setting change. I'm going to say we want to do some black and whites. Generally, this might be something you would do in post in Photoshop. But just because of this high contrast light, we can go to our styles and presets, our black and whites, and we can actually select some sort of grainy black and white we want to apply. Or you can do it manually too by just desaturating the image. In fact, let's do that. So we could go up to exposure, adjust our saturation all the way down. Now we can start playing with our contrast. And this is where you can get into your curves and you can adjust your RGB. So even though this is a a black and white image, there's still a lot of detail within in the RGB channel. So as you adjust the red, I just want to add a little bit of warmth there. Overall, I want to add a little more contrast through the curve. So we're just making a general S curve there. And then the last thing we'll do is I reset the color balance so we don't have those blues in the shadows or any of that. So now we have our black and white image, and you'll see as we shoot going forward, I'm going to switch back to the other lens. And as we shoot going forward, these images are going to come in with that black and white look. And even maybe we'll just add a little grain for fun so we can go over to our presets. Oops, sorry, where'd it go? And our film grain, it's down at the bottom. Here we go. I knew I had that in there. So we have fine grain. We can kind of see what these do real quick just so you can see the options. So let me bring that up. We'll just add a lot so that way it's really obvious. So We have 73 impact on grain. If we go through the different grains, you can see soft grain, more harsh grain. So we'll do something that's more harsh and gritty. You can actually change the granularity of it, so it's the size of the grains. You can see it gets larger. It just looks a little different the more you play with it, and that's the intensity. So we have a decent amount of grain. I'm going to have you stay right in there, and I'm going to have you look almost towards the light real quick. So shoulders closed off to camera, so this way, and then looking up towards that light a little bit. Yeah, maybe not a little under it. And then this will have some nice light, but definitely a different look, and you'll see how all those settings we just did now apply to the next shot. But again, I became untethered. So we have the shot on the camera in full color. Let me disconnect, reconnect, and when this comes up, all you need to do is hit OK, and we're already re-tethered. So same thing. So you can see now we have these nice, rich, high contrast black and white images coming through. And again, it's applying those same settings that we did from the previous setting to all the images that we're taking now. If we want to get in there a lot closer. Yep, perfect. One more looking off that way. We're going to go with a vertical. And then I'm going to actually move my position so you can keep looking towards that light. And this will have even more contrast as I get away from that main light. And if you want to up the contrast, we could actually take our fill down slightly. And this will make the main light pop even more and add more contrast to that black and white. So there we go. So that's kind of 3 different ways within the same lighting setup to get 3 different looks, whether it's more neutral toned images, just showing the general setup, to going with that more blue tone with the orange feel, kind of that cinematic color grading, or again, switching to black and white. And once you do this, let's say you enjoy this image, but you really like this color tone, you can just go up here, copy those settings, go down to this image, paste those settings. Again, we got to get rid of the black and white there. And then you'll have similar settings from, these type of images down to here. So you can always adjust those. You can even select which variants you want to copy. So if you don't want to copy all the variants, you can actually go within your adjustments and select certain variants that you want. So let's say you don't want it to touch the exposure, but you do want it to add the color. You can go through and actually pick which variants when you hit copy and paste, which ones it will copy and paste. So it doesn't have to do them all. I like it for it to do them all because I do them all individually on purpose, but some photographers might have other reasons for making adjustments, and they might not want to adjust everything at the same time. So again, it's totally up to you, totally personal preference, and it's one of those things where the more you play with it, the more you'll learn what you like, what works for you. And at any time, if you want to just go back to the normal original image, you just hit this back arrow. And again, that brings you back to that. If you want to apply those settings, let's say from this image to that image you just adjusted, there you go. So you can do anything you want, you can do any adjustments you want, and you can fine tune, change on the fly. And again, all these are adjustable. For instance, this image, we see it's a little bright here. We can make sure it's not blown out. Oh, what do you know? It's approaching that 235. Or whatever I have it set at. If you want to see and change that preference too, you can go up to Capture 1, Preferences. You can go all the way to Warnings, and you can see it'll warn you for different types of settings. So you can see Warn when moving images. There's all those, but then within your exposure, you can actually set your exposure warning. So you can see I have it at 245. You could adjust it lower, and it will obviously make more things show up in the red. You can even adjust the color that you want. Like let's say you want exposure warning to pop up in green on anything over 245. I don't know why you would want to do this, but maybe you don't like looking at red. So now if you hit that warning, it makes everything green. Or maybe you were shooting an image with a lot of red and you couldn't see it. So you can always change that. You also probably saw when you go to Preferences, you can even set a shadow warning. So if things are too dark, let's say you want shadow detail on anything under 10 on the RGB scale. There you can see it's starting to creep in. So you're losing things to complete darkness here, complete shadow, down in the bottom of the image, which I don't necessarily care about. I'm more concerned about saving highlights than shadows. That's why I usually turn off the feature of enabling shadows, and I usually keep my highlight warning as bright red. Oops, let me reselect that. There we go. And you can even pick target levels and things like that depending on what you like. So there's so many adjustments you can make. It's really easy to do. Again, I keep that warnings there. I usually keep it off because it's a little bit obnoxious, but it is nice to have to know that we're approaching that. And that's something you can, within our HDR tab, we can actually bring those highlights down a little bit by upping the shadows. Let me zoom in real quick and show you that. So you can actually change, you can see it's brighter or darker as you adjust that highlight slider. So it's totally up to you how you want to do it. I just like to show you all the options you have, so when you start playing with it, you know what you can do, how you can change it, how you can adjust it, and more importantly, how you can save it and make it work for you every time you open the software. So we're going to move on to a different lighting setup. We're going to have Michelle change. I'm going to adjust some of the lighting. We're going to do a second setup that is totally different. It's going to be less dark and moody and more bright and airy. So we're going to actually make this white backdrop white and not dark gray. We're going to change some of the color settings we're playing with and basically do an entirely different setup. But I'm going to show you how you can make those adjustments work for you with white, and how if your background isn't completely white when you're shooting in camera, you can use Capture One and tethering to make it appear more white just through the adjustments you use and how those apply to every image, and help you know what your final image could potentially look like after you make those adjustments. So you can go ahead and change. We'll work on that setup, and then we'll get started on the white backdrop.